Okay. So, I hope everybody had a good weekend. Anybody go to the fair? You went to the fair? You saw fried, you had fried Oreos. How were they?
But that's all I had.
That's all you have, just the fried Oreos.
And then I felt really sick after.
Yeah, it's amazing how deep that pride can make you feel, great. Anybody else go to the fair?
Oh, God, no.
Cheeseburger from Wisconsin. Cheeseburger booth. There are a bunch of booths that sell fried cheese on a stick, but definitely the Wisconsin shirts are definitely the best. So, again, I tell you about this because I think the fair is a wonderful example of marketing at its finest, at least transactional sales. And so it's an example of how older philosophies of marketing are still employed, even in the modern era, or the contemporary era. How many of you watched the debate last night? You recorded it? You watched it? Did you watch the whole thing?
No, just the first, like, just parts of it.
Just parts of it? How long did you watch it for?
Maybe like an hour and a half.
An hour and a half? It was only 90 minutes. So
Oh,
you
okay. I
watched
thought it was 2
most
hours.
of it. No, it was 90 minutes.
Probably an hour then.
How, who do you think won?
I mean, at first it seemed like it was kind of maybe tied, but then at the end it kind of seemed like Hillary got the better of Trump.
Okay. Did you watch it? No? Anybody else watch it?
I watched about 20 minutes of it, that was about it.
And what did you think in that 20 minutes?
I don't know, Trump's ridiculous.
Just little kids going back and forth.
Yeah, I feel like there's just them bickering at each other the whole time.
You didn't think it was professional? I thought he was much more professional in this debate than he has been in the previous debates. I mean, he didn't call her crooked Hillary on stage, which is what he was famous for doing in the other debates where he would call Marco Rubio Little Marco and Lion Ted. He avoided all of that, so I thought he was much more polished, looked more presidential than he has in the past. This is an example of political marketing, and I think it's one of the things that you should follow. How many of you plan on voting for the president in November? Okay, so there are 2 more debates. There's one vice presidential debate. You should watch that. And I think you'll see a lot of discussion about different plans for where we should go with the economy. They're going to make arguments in the political marketplace trying to get your vote. And I think you can use this, what we've learned in here in terms of the ethical theories, as maybe a framework for analyzing which candidate is the better candidate for the United States in terms of either utilitarian perspective. I mean, Donald Trump bases most of his argument on utilitarian principles. I am going to be better for the economy than she is. I'm going to create jobs. I'm going to negotiate deals. I know how to do that. She doesn't. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. She has a better shot at it, although historically speaking, the party in power after 2 terms has a hard time maintaining the White House. And there is a model called the Abramowitz model that looks at this, and it gives a penalty if the party in power is seeking to maintain power for a 3rd term. Because historically what people have done is they've switched parties after 2 terms. They get tired of one and they say, well, let's give the other party a chance. I think if she does win, the electoral map favors her right now, but I think if she does win, she will probably be a 1-term president, unless, of course, the Republicans totally implode and are incapable of putting up a strong candidate to run against her in 4 years. So it'll be interesting to watch. We didn't finish talking about duty ethics, did we? We got finished with utilitarianism. Did we talk about duty at all? Okay. Deontological ethics or duty ethics is a response to utilitarianism, where utilitarianism says what we need to do is we need to calculate what is going to produce the overall greatest happiness, either in each individual situation or in the aggregate through developing rules that can apply to all people at all times through the sort of experience of human history. Duty ethics says we can't look at whether or not the ends justify the means. We have to ascertain in ethics what our duties are. Now, how are we going to do this? So just like utilitarianism has two types of forms, there's act utilitarian and rule utilitarian, duty ethics comes in two forms, or two types. The oldest type is called religious absolutism. Where are you going to ascertain the duties a priori for a religious absolutist?
Whatever religion you follow.
Whatever religion, you're going to go to the book. And you're going to look at the book and see what the book tells you in terms of the duties. Now, one of the things that's interesting to think about is, why did philosophy develop in ancient Greece about 2,500 years ago? And why did these three men sort of arise in Athens at the same time? So you have Socrates, who is kind of the father of classical Western thought. His student Plato writes down what he says, and Plato's student Aristotle comes up with a fully worked out philosophy. And I think one of the reasons I've heard lots of arguments be made about why these people came to prominence in the development of philosophy. In a number of settings, I've listened to people argue about what it is that led to this. Sort of like people have argued about what led to three industry titans all arising in a little backwoods state called Arkansas at about the same time. Sam Walton, J.B. Hunt, and Dan Tyson all started to rise to prominence and built great companies in around the Bentonville area of Arkansas at about the same time. So what is it that led to the development of philosophy? One of the people that I listened to make an argument was that, well, philosophy developed in Athens because they had an economy based on slavery. So they had lots of leisure time to lounge around in Athens and think about lofty thoughts because they weren't doing hard manual labor. I don't think that this really works because there are societies that have been far more dependent upon slavery to develop than the Greeks did. In fact, the Greeks recognized that it was a very fragile economy and they started limiting the amount of slaves, and they even started limiting it. It was possible in some city-states in ancient Greece for Greeks to enslave other Greeks if they lost a war. And they stopped that process because it was having really bad implications for their citizens and the economy. Another theory that I listened to said that, well, it's because there's so much sunshine in Greece. Isn't this just the ideal place for it to pop up? You've got plenty of sunshine, you've got this beautiful setting on the Greek islands, and lots of slaves, and isn't that great? Again, the sun shines in most places in the world. I certainly don't think the Greeks had more sunshine than Pharaoh in Egypt, and there was absolutely no philosophical thought that came out of ancient Egypt. But I think the real answer lies in the fact that the Greeks didn't have a very satisfactory religion in terms of answering these three great questions that have plagued all societies in all places at all times. This question of knowledge, this question of governance, and the question of conduct. The Greeks had a religion, but these were not people that you necessarily turned to answer those questions because they were messy. The Greeks have a system of gods, and who is the chief god, for those of you who remember from your humanities courses? Yeah, Zeus was the head god. How did Zeus become the head god?
Killing his father.
By killing his father. He triumphs over the Titans and kills his father and becomes the head god. And he banishes one of his brothers to the underworld, to Hades, and one to the sea. That's how he became. And he's a guy that's going down from Mount Olympus, and there are these demigods. They believe that there are people that are the offspring of mortals and the gods, and they're sort of demigods. These are messy people. You didn't upset the gods. You worshiped them and you gave offerings to them, but they weren't who you turned to answer this ultimate meaning of life, because the gods themselves were attempting to to find and struggle with these questions. And so I think you have to develop an answer to these questions, and because they didn't have the satisfactory religion that sort of answered the questions for them, they had to rely on philosophy. So the problems with religious absolutism and duty ethics is that, you know, whose book are we going to rely upon? Well, in the United States, we're going to rely on who? The Bible, right? We're going to rely on the Bible. Now, that's where you're going to turn to for answers regarding what are the duties. So, how many duties are there in the Bible?
For who? For like Jews or Gentiles? Where are we looking here? Old
Well,
Testament, New Testament. Where do you want to start?
Well, now you've already got a problem there, right?
Yeah.
How many in the Old Testament? How many commandments are there?
I lost track after like 500 something.
There are not 10. There are 10 big ones, but there are something like 535 positive commandments and 1,000 negative commandments. We can find, you know, lots of things that thou shalt not in the Bible. If we turn to Leviticus 18:20. What does that say? What does Leviticus say in 18:20? If a man lies with a man as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, their blood shall surely be upon them. That's a commandment, isn't it? Don't do that. Leviticus 18:22, it's an abomination to eat a rabbit. It's an abomination to eat shrimp. Leviticus 18:30, it's an abomination to wear linen and wool together.
Fashion the Bible.
Fashion advice from the Bible. And there are, one of the things that our sales team does is they go to this competition called the International Collegiate Sales Competition. And the first year that I took students to that competition, they were selling Tom James. And one of the things that Tom James does is they have a line that are specifically for Orthodox Jews, where they have a rabbi that certifies that there is no linen and wool mixed in the suits that they produce. A lot of suits that are manufactured for men, this is a Hart Schaffner and Mark double-breasted suit. The reason I wore it today was so that I can point out that in the collar, it's made out of wool, but the lining of the collar in the back is oftentimes, because linen is a thicker material, is made out of linen on the inside. So they manufacture them so that they're not violating the rabbinic code. Well, in the United States, I think you can see what the problem is with this. Whose book are we going to use? Well, okay, we're primarily a Christian nation. We're going to use the Bible. Well, which version of the Bible should we use?
Supposedly all interpreted kind of the same.
Well, there's differences between the Catholic Bible and the Protestant Bible, isn't there?
Yep.
So whose Bible are we using? Are we going to use the Catholic version of the Bible? Or are we going to use the Protestant version of the Bible?
I mean, if we're going with majority, is there more Catholics the largest denomination of Christianity in America?
Well,
How does
you
that
know,
change that?
I don't know. That may very well be that they are the largest single denomination. There are certainly more Protestants. If you take all of them
Yeah.
together, there are more Protestants than there are Catholics. We've only had one Catholic president.
We saw what happened to that.
He got assassinated.
No one good.
You know, that was Kennedy. Should we use the New International Version? The version that dispenses with all the, you know, begatting and the fancy terms from the old Bible. Well, Kant says, you know, we're not going to be able to come up with ethics because there are different religions, and so he comes up with something called rational absolutism. The duties are discerned not by turning to the book, but they're discerned a priori through rational thought. The importance of results is denied. The duties are discerned a priori, and we can know them based on a critical analysis of what it is that we should be doing as human beings, and we can know them by applying rational principles to everyday situations. You should be able to, according to Kant, will that your action would be a universal maxim of law. You should be able to will that your action be a universal maximum of law. How do you do that? Well, Kant says that what you have to do is you have to have a duty that is logically consistent, universally applicable, and therefore duty-bound to act upon. So, what's logically consistent? Universally applicable. Well, never treat another rational being, that's a human being, as a means to an end, but rather as an end in and of themselves. Never treat another human being as a means to an end, but rather as an end in themselves. So what does that mean, which you can never do? How do we treat people as means to an end?
Treat them like a transaction.
Treat them like a transaction? So, I mean, one of the things that makes it difficult to apply duty ethics in the business world is that we do use people all the time, don't we? As means to an end. Our clients are a means to what? Money. Earning money. Now, I don't think Kant would say that we can't have business, but what could you engage in business that would be ethical? Well, never lie.
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure. Give people an autonomous choice. Allow them to have autonomy. That means that you should never lie to them. Now, you can't have a few glasses of wine and begin to recite the categorical imperative and not sort of chuckle. Never lie. Never lie. Why can't you lie? Because when you lie to somebody, you're manipulating them for your own gain, aren't you? Why is it that you tell a lie? When you were a little kid and you were about to get in trouble, how many of you lied to your parents? Few of you are willing to admit this. The rest of you were all, I mean, we're among saints in this room, apparently. But 4 of you are willing to admit that you lied to your parents. Now, why did you lie to your parents?
For our own benefit?
Yeah, what was the benefit that you,
We wouldn't get in trouble.
Not-
skip out the
no,
belt.
I was about to say, exactly, not get hit with a belt or fly swatter.
Yeah.
Whatever was available for
Um,
swinging.
how many of your parents believed in corporal punishment?
Ooh, yes.
That's very typical of Oklahomans.
Ooh.
They believe in spanking.
Gosh,
If you do that in Walmart now, DHS may be called on you. One of the things that we watched at the fair this last weekend with my niece and nephew was they have at the Western show in the OK Corral area something called mutton busting. How many of you have seen this or heard of mutton busting? What is mutton busting? You know what it is? Yep, sheep. It has to do with sheep.
You're like,
little kids running.
Little kids ride the sheep. That's what they do.
Okay.
They strap little kids to the sheep.
That's awful.
And so the announcer says, let me explain to you the way this works. You can't spank your child in Walmart, but you can strap them to a sheep for entertainment. And it's amazing how long some of those little kids will hold on to that sheep. Put them on the sheep and they let the sheep out just like you do a bull ride and the sheep goes running around. Inevitably, like this one kid just held on forever. I must have gotten his brains beat against the corral at least 3 times that I witnessed. So, you know, you lied to your parents so that it wasn't that they were going to strap you to the sheep, but they were probably going to, in your case, spank you. And you wanted to avoid that. Well, you were manipulating them. Right?
I didn't
You're
want to-
manipulating, you're taking away their ability to make an independent judgment, albeit about your behavior, but an independent judgment about maybe something of critical importance. Why is it that parents discipline their children? Well, it's because they want them to grow up to be, I guess, socially acceptable human beings that have the ability to prosper. So Kant says you can't lie. You have to be, we've all heard the fable of George Washington, who did what? Honest George. Yeah, he cut down the cherry tree and his father asked who did it and he said, I cannot tell a lie. This is probably an apocryphal story, right? It's just meant to illustrate how morally upright our founding fathers were. Now, mind you, most of our founding fathers also owned slaves, which I'm not sure how morally upright that is. George Washington had slaves, although he is the only founding father that did what with regard to the slaves?
And he set him free when he died?
He freed them when he died. He freed them when he died. The only one. Thomas Jefferson certainly didn't do that, even though he sort of intimated that he thought slavery was a horrible thing. So, we'll never lie. Should we ever lie? Is it ever acceptable to lie in business? You're throwing a surprise party? So you're lying for somebody else's benefit. Maybe they don't like surprise parties.
Too bad.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Never lie.
Maybe lie to not hurt someone's feelings.
Oh, that's always a good one, right? Now, your insignificant other asks you how they look in some outfit.
I'll let you know.
How do I look in this? You look like pure unadulterated hell.
Yep.
Pastels wash you out and make you look like death warmed over. Go upstairs and change.
Well put.
Brutal honesty. That's what Kant would say. Brutal honesty, yeah. You look terrible.
What if you just change the subject? Then, you don't gotta lie.
But it's, I mean, like, so that goes back to, he's not telling the truth. You're avoiding the truth. So,
There's-
like, is that considered a
Sounds like
lie?
Presidential debate.
Yeah, so basically what you just watched last night.
There's sins of omission as well as sins of commission. Leaving it out. Change the subject.
I'll stick with that.
You'll stick with that?
Yeah, personally.
Most people retreat to what they think is neutral ground on that question. You look fine. And everyone knows that FINE stands for freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Fine. Well, Kant would say, if you lie, you take away that person's ability to make an autonomous decision. If you tell them you look fine, well, maybe they look like unadulterated hell. And they should know that so that they don't make a fool of themselves.
It's a double-edged sword there.
Really good.
I don't know. Let's take a harder example, the hypothetical of the inquiring murderer. You live next door to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. Smith has a drinking problem, and he, from time to time, takes out his frustration on his wife. And he's told her that if she ever leaves, he will hunt her down and kill her. This is The Sleeping with the Enemy. How many of you have seen that movie? It's a rather old movie at this point in time. It was one of Julia Roberts' earlier films. Not quite as early as Mystic Pizza. How many of you have seen Mystic Pizza? That was kind of her first big breakout role. In Sleeping with the Enemy, she has this husband who is very abusive. Of course, he always apologizes, but he tells her if she ever leaves, he'll kill her. And she does leave. She starts a new life, but he finds out where she is, and she ultimately ends up killing him in that movie. So Mrs. Smith tells you that she's going to go to the shelter for abused women, and don't tell her husband. Mr. Smith comes home several hours later and says, I believe my wife has left me and gone to the shelter for abused women. Do you know anything about that? Well, now in this hypothetical, you can either lie. I mean, if you say nothing, you're relatively certain that Mr. Smith's going to do what? He's going to go to the shelter for abused women, and he's probably going to find his wife, and he may kill her. If you tell the truth, it's going to, reaffirm and hasten it. Kant would say you can't lie. If bad things happen, then so be it, but you can't ever lie. Well, for most of us, this really is a little harsh. Never lie? Well, why could you never lie? Well, I think the answer has to be that the reason that you could ultimately never lie is that because if everybody lied, how many of you have seen a movie, not a very popular movie, but one that is sort of interesting to think about. It's a kind of dystopian called The Invention of Lying. Anybody seen that movie? Yeah.
Yeah.
Gervais, and he's kind of an average person, and everybody is brutally honest. It starts out in the movie with him going on a date, and she's called by her friend or mother or something like that, and she's asked, are you going to say, why did you go on the date? Well, I had nothing better to do. What is he like? He's kind of dumpy looking, and it's intimated that the person on the other end, I believe, says something about, are you going to sleep with him? And she said, no, probably not. I'm not, right in front of him. And he is the first person to lie. And he realizes that by lying, he gets all of these things. And so it starts to lead to a breakdown of society. Well, I think that's the reason that Kant would say ultimately you can't lie, is because if we engaged in lying all the time, we could never form a society, could we? It would be very difficult to do that.
Well, you have to have trust to even create a
Yeah.
business relationship to begin with, really.
You don't have any trust. If everybody is lying, you have no ability to cooperate because it leads to trust issues. You have to be reasonably certain that the person that you're dealing with is going to perform. And so ultimately, isn't that a way of saying that results really do matter? I think it is. I think that's a way of saying that results really ultimately are important. So isn't it a backdoor, a method of getting to the idea that results matter. Well, I've given you the valid ethical theories: virtue ethics, utilitarianism, deontological ethics. What would be an acceptable moral minimum then? Well, an acceptable moral minimum is one that is premised on logic in some form. All of these have problems, but you have to have some logical basis, is not emotive, and doesn't allow for exceptions. So it could include an analysis of sort of all three. But that's an acceptable moral minimum. There is no one theory that I've been able to develop that absolutely works in all places at all times. But if you base them on those three things, you get close to as perfect a system as you can. So you're going to have to take into consideration everyone involved, which is what we talk about in Chapter 3, which is corporate social responsibility. You're going to have to take not just a shareholder perspective, but a stakeholder perspective. Which leads me to our next critical thinking challenge. What I want you to do in your groups is I want you to look at the case study in Chapter 3. How many of you have an older edition of the book? How many of you have this edition?
Who's our one person in the group with the book?
So I want you to, in your groups,
What if you have a book?
look at the case study in Chapter 3, which is Walmart.
Heck yeah.
And I want you to analyze Walmart from each of the perspectives: a virtue, a utilitarian, and a duty ethics, and determine whether or not Walmart is an ethical company based on an analysis of the three. So I will create a Dropbox for your group submission. You should have at least 5 paragraphs. I'm giving you time to work on it in class, starting with an introduction based on analysis of the 3 perspectives that are valid ethical theories. Walmart is blank. Ethical, it's not ethical. Or it's partially ethical, partially unethical. 3 substantive examples that flow from the analysis, and then a conclusion. And then we will talk about your answers in class. So I will give you the rest of the time to do your critical thinking. I'll give you some time. On Thursday I'll hang around in case you have questions, and I'll create a Dropbox with the assignment in class. Yes, sir.
Those examples, we just make up examples.
They're-
Support.
Look at the case study. There's tons. I mean, you can find, if you want to go beyond, you have the ability to earn bonus points if you go sort of beyond the case study. How many of you have this version of the book? Everybody have at least one in your group that has this version of the book, so that you can look at the Walmart case. You know, I mean, things like Walmart has been extremely financially successful. It was first publicly traded in 1970. When 300,000 shares were offered at $16.50 per share. In 1990, Walmart stock experienced its 11th 2-for-1 split. 100 shares bought in 1970 would be equal to 204,800 shares valued at $53 a share at the end of 2004. For an initial investment of $1,650, you would now be worth $10.8 million. Isn't that amazing? Think about. I mean, that, you know, that's. So, you know, that's one of the things if you're doing a utilitarian analysis, well, they've obviously done what? They've increased shareholder wealth. Is that overall happiness?
For the shareholders.
For the shareholders. I don't know about for the others. I mean, you know, look at the case study. If you go beyond the case study and find stuff, you have the ability to earn bonus points. Yes, sir. We'll talk about them on Thursday. So I'm giving you the rest of class, and I'll be here to answer questions. And we'll talk about your answers on Thursday. I'm going to set up the Dropbox for you. So everybody has at least one person with a computer in the group, right? So we can work on this. So 5 paragraphs, introduction, three points on corporate social responsibility and analysis based on the valid ethical theories of utilitarianism, virtue ethics, duty ethics, or a moral minimum, which could be a combination of all three. Got it?
Ready, break.
Ready? Get in your groups, and I will create the drop box.